Welcome to our webinar. Today's webinar is about creating partnerships to source qualified candidates with disabilities. And we're going to get started. I'm Deb. I'll introduce me in a second. I want you all to know that I have my trusty sidekick, Becca, here with me to do all the wonderful things of technology. And on top of everything she usually does, my internet is down. So I am presenting via my phone. She's going to be forwarding the slides. So you'll hear me giving her some directions about, forwarding the slides, and it's all going to be good. We're going to have a lot of fun today, and hopefully everybody's going to learn something really, really cool. So why do we need this webinar? Most people with disabilities are not in your typical labor pool, and we covered that in the last webinar. So we're going to talk today about how you find them differently in a very specific way. So sourcing partnerships with disability-focused organizations is different, but also similar to vendor contracts. And one of the most highly recommended ways to increase disability inclusion in your workforce. This is how we did it at Walgreens. This is how many organizations do it. So I wanted to focus on this because it's such a popular way, and it's a very successful way of bringing more people with disabilities into your workforce. You don't have to do it this way, but it's a very popular way. So I wanted to devote an entire webinar about this. Next slide. So a quick couple things. This webinar is being recorded, so the replay can be made available to those who could not attend live. And we want your interaction. We have such a fabulous audience today. I'm just really excited and can't wait to hear all of their participation and interaction. All of you have so much to say. I know you do. Lots of questions. We're going to ask you to use the chat, the Q&A, and the hand raising. And if you aren't familiar with those, let me briefly explain them quickly. So if you're using the chat, next slide. You will want to click. You'll see a purple arrow pointing out where the chat is. Click. Then a chat window opens up, and you're going to want to type in that window and make sure that you pick your audience. We prefer if you pick the everybody, but you can also just pick the panelists if you want it to be private. Next slide. One more. Thank you. All right, so raising your hand. This is, I think, the most popular way to use the interactive components of Zoom. So when you're raising your hand, you're going to see this little spot that looks like a smiley face. And when you click on it, you get a menu. And you can do all sorts of things with that menu. But the most important thing is that you can raise your hand and then click. And just don't forget to lower your hand. So Becca will be monitoring the chat, and if you've got something to say and you want to have your mic turned on, she'll be able to control that, take care of that. Just don't forget to lower your hands once you've had a chance to talk, or if you no longer have something to say. So my objectives for today are to discuss the ways to find a partner, to walk through how to select a partner, and to give the tips for managing the partnership overall. I love this Kenny Rogers quote, and you'll know why as we get through this presentation. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. So next slide. So what are your objectives? For this webinar, you might have come with something in your head already. We're planning on talking about finding, selecting, or managing, but I'd love for you to just pop into the chat and give your vote for which of these. You can click. Do you want to discuss ways to find a partner? Do you want to walk through how to select a partner? Or do you want to learn more about managing the partnership? I'll give you a couple of seconds to vote into the chat. And if you can forward the slide one more time, Becca, I will give a little interlude during this time. I'll be just explaining to you again, we are recording this webinar, and the replay will be available via email. I can't promise it'll be tomorrow. I'm sorry, but it'll be very soon after this. It'll be captioned, and you'll be able to leverage it for your resources. But if you want to take screenshots during the presentation, please feel free to do so. And that's a great way also to remember the information. Becca, do we have anything in the chat?
So I think we have a balance of things, but finding seems to be pretty high up on the list. But we do have, people want some information on all three sections.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, next slide. So people are always wondering, how do I know about this stuff? How is Deb Russell anybody to speak about how to find partnerships? And I gave a little bit of it away. This was a key thing that we did in one of the most successful things I've done in my lifetime. I started my career helping people with disabilities find jobs, working in government, and then, next slide, I had the joy of being able to create the Walgreens Initiative. And I'm so proud of the work that we did there. I was able to help us create inclusion in our distribution centers. And then as we mastered that across our entire network of 22 distribution centers, then we went and tackled the stores. The retail model's different. And so inclusion looks different there. I mean, in the end, it doesn't look different, but getting there looked different for the stores. And then we also did some work for the corporate headquarters. And then when I left Walgreens, I went on to help more than 100 companies employ more people with disabilities. And I actually spent the 2 of the last 3 years focusing on helping agencies be able to meet employers' needs, because we just need to make sure that we're working on both sides, getting together and creating the success, which is employment of people with disabilities that are there meeting the labor needs of companies. Next slide. So we'll start on finding partners, since that was the most popular one. I'm happy that it's the first topic I'm going to be talking about. And we're going to be talking about partners sourcing lots of qualified candidates with disabilities. So next slide. Different kinds of partners. There are all sorts of kinds of partners that you could work with to help your workforce be more inclusive of people with disabilities. So you could work with schools, employment services agencies, disability-specific organizations, governmental agencies, disability employment consultants, which is what I call myself. You could work with groups that are nonprofits or for-profit or governmental ones. You could be looking for people and organizations that are structured and have experience as experts in disability employment. It's really a cool industry that has evolved over the last 15 years since I left. Well, since I started at Walgreens. Walgreens was the first company that wanted to do this at a large scale. And we learned so much doing that. And then we wanted to teach other companies. And so other companies have gotten engaged in this. And there is a small cottage industry of people who are experts really in how disability and employment intersect. And when you're an employer, that's what you want to find. You want to find somebody who's going to be very helpful in understanding the dynamics of where disability and employment come together. So next slide. There's a lot of different approaches you can take to finding partners. In some ways, I'm not sure that that's different than anything else we do. We always look on the internet. We look for referrals. You could use your ERG if you have an employee resource group at your company. That's a great source to find ideas of who could be your partners. You can look internally at employees who have disabilities or employees who have family members with disabilities and ask them for where do they know that people are getting employment services, people with disabilities are getting employment services. You could actually put out an RFP if you wanted to. You can also try to partner with foundations or other organizations like that are very interested and doing a lot of work related to employment for people with disabilities. And you can look at other local companies in your area. Where are other companies getting their disability inclusive workforce? Some companies see this as a competitive edge, and in which case they will not share with you the secrets that they found. But most companies realize that this is such, we're so early on in this journey that it's just benefits everybody to share as much as we can learn. So those are the ways I know how to find these partners. I think internet research is where most people go, but if you don't start with internet research, make sure that you do hop on the web to check out those the names of the organizations that you've got some leads to go and pursue. Next slide. A discussion that I hear all the time from businesses is, should I go with a local partner or a national partner? And obviously those are businesses that have more than one site. And the tendency of every company I've worked with in the last 5 years is to pick a national partner. And I'd like to caution you to say that each time we've gone after that, what we've ended up with was a bunch of local partners, one at each site. So national partners are great, but a lot of times they don't really provide that employment solution from a national perspective. They leverage their chapters or their affiliates, their local outlets that share their brand to actually do that sourcing for you. So you don't have to pick the ARC and go with the ARC in every single community where you are, or Goodwill in every single community. You can actually determine what's best in each local level. It just means that you need your local leaders to do some of the vetting that we're going to talk about. Since those kinds of entities do not have financial relationships with their local affiliates, you don't have to worry about having a master service agreement with a national entity or anything like that. But they are great for giving you connections. Now, the one exception to that is that recently there have been a few companies who have become national sourcing partners for specifically about workforce with disabilities. And one of those entities is JEC, the James Emmett and Company. I just started doing some work with them. They really understand how to do this, and they can work with a company in any site because they know how to train up the local people to find the sourcing. So they take a national model and they take it down to the local level and embed people who are experts in those local places. So I think that that's the one exception to the idea of not wanting to go with a national source. There are also national organizations that do help companies think about disability inclusion, like Disability In and the National Organization on Disability. But they don't tend to actually do that local sourcing. They might help with policies or some of those other kinds of maybe things you want to get in place as you're employing more people with disabilities. You might be worried about certain things. They can probably help with some of that. They can definitely connect you with other businesses that are employing people with disabilities. So there are great opportunities to really network, I think that's the best word for it, with other companies that are doing this, so that you can feel like you're not alone in this. But they don't necessarily help you with the sourcing part of it. And we want to focus today on sourcing. So next slide. Oh, sorry. Next slide. I already talked about that. Okay. So when we're talking about the local level, I'm sorry, back one up. There we go. Sorry. When we talk about the local level, that was my slides. I'm sorry about that, Becca. I'll edit that out. Besides from the local chapters or affiliates of national brands, you can also just find local small organizations. And they're sometimes a lot better than the big names or the brand names that you would think of from a national level. So I really encourage people to dig into your own community where your work site is and see what resources exist there. You can be looking at community-based organizations like mental health centers that are funded by the government, but aren't actually run by the government. Mental health centers do those sort of things. Schools, universities, obviously community colleges and tech schools, those are great places to create partnerships to bring more people with disabilities. And just on that particular bullet point, schools, universities, community colleges, and tech schools are all required to have services for their students with disabilities and a coordinator or some kind of coordinating body to serve those students. So it's a great way to get in and get the communication training you're looking for directly to the students with disabilities. A lot of students with disabilities do not participate in the regular career services activities. So if you have a relationship with a school and their career services, you want to just take that extra step and say, hey, career services folks, can you connect me with the disability services folks also, just to make sure you're having the opportunity to have your opportunities communicated to everybody. Also, there's employment services agencies who serve people with disabilities in addition to everybody else that they serve. So that's a way to look for these things locally. And then there's case management services also. And finally, I want to talk about veteran services because we know that a significant portion of veterans have disabilities. And a lot of the veterans who are seeking services because they're a veteran, it's because they have a disability as well. And so you will find a pretty high percentage of people with disabilities within the veteran services organizations. So Warriors, what's it called? Warriors to Work? No. I can't think of the name of the organization, but there's quite a few veteran services organizations, sorry about that, who serve folks, veterans, and they want to be able to help them with employment specifically. They also help them with reentry from our armed forces back into civilian life. And those are the programs within the veteran services that you really want to try to target and see if you can create a relationship for sourcing. Next slide. Okay, so what can you do to prepare? this is where people get kind of hung up. All right, those are kinds of the things that I can find and think about who I'm going to find. But what do I do to prepare for this? And I think the most important thing to do is, what are you looking for? Get an idea of what you want. Are you looking for one candidate or a particular um, uh, skill set of candidates? Or are you looking for all the sourcing needs you've got? Are you looking for higher levels like executives, in which case you're probably going to want a headhunter kind of organization? Or are you looking for more across the board? Sometimes companies are looking for very project specific, or when they have high volume fluctuations, they're looking for those needs to be set or to be taken care of, maybe seasonal hiring or permanent hiring. So are you looking for full-time? Are you looking for part-time? Those are all sorts of things I think that you want to think about and have in your head when you start reaching out to these organizations, because they're going to want to know, what are you looking for, not just who. Next slide. One of the other opportunities that you can leverage is to either work with one partner or to work with a coalition of partners. So at Walgreens and some of our distribution centers, we worked with just one organization, and they served as the lead organization and looked out across the whole realm within that community of service providers. And in some cases, we actually worked with a formal coalition. We needed to really sort of be that intervening party that made sure all the players played nicely with each other. And that was a key part of the role that we needed to play, was to really get people to work together as a coalition. Ideally, you work with one partner and they can then reach out to the rest of the potential partners in the area and serve as that single point of contact. But coalitions could be an alternative. And some companies actually really like the coalition perspective. So when you're thinking about what you want, what kind of a partner are you looking for, this is another consideration. Next slide. I think the next most thing to think about is, are you on a thoughtful quest? Are you looking for the best alternative, or are you just grabbing whatever's available, whoever answers the phone the first time, whoever's going to be, responding to you quickly? Or do you really want to find the best partner? And I say that to say, a lot of these agencies, and like I said, I do training with these agencies, they just don't have the mechanics set up to always immediately answer to a employer who says, oh, I'm interested in a partnership to hire people with disabilities. They're busy serving people with disabilities. They've got a lot of other priorities. It can take them a little while to get back to you. Or it may actually require some hunting. That's one of the things that disability inclusion consultants can do, is do that hunting work for you if you don't have the time or don't feel you have the expertise to do it. But I think that it's an important point. Are you looking for something right now, or are you looking for something that's going to be more of a long-term kind of solution? Next slide. So I talked about a lot of different approaches to how to look for a partner, where to find a partner, what kinds of partners are there. So I want you to think about which approach will suit your needs best. I mean, businesses move fast, so sometimes we just need to go with whatever there is. But sometimes you actually have the power to choose. And you have what they want. They want jobs for people with disabilities. Click. They want the folks that they provide services to need jobs. So these entities need you as much as you need them. And so the question is, what sort of approach will be best for you? And I just want to put that out to the audience right now. Just type into the chat real quick if you're looking for something quick, or if you want to have an initiative that's more thoughtful. I will be talking about this. The next steps I'll be talking about will apply to either one of them. I'm just kind of curious what you're looking for right now. Oh, I can see the chat. Becca, you're so excited. I know you're excited. I can see the chat. Folks are saying they want the more thoughtful approach. Excellent. All right. Next slide. So let's talk about selecting a good partner. So again, getting what you want, or are you just going to settle? You guys have already voted. You want what's going to take a little time, because that's where you get the quality. And I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes you're just stuck, but even if you're just stuck and you got to grab whatever's there, I think it behooves you to take the time to then create a process that really allows you to be thoughtful and make sure that you're getting somebody who's a great match. So next slide. One thing I want you to not be intimidated by is the fact that we're talking about disability. And if you attended any of the other webinars, you know that we know that disability can seem like a very intimidating characteristic of a person, especially when we're talking about employees, because it kind of flies in the face. Ability, disability. It seems like this thing in our society that we really treat carefully. Sometimes we treat people too carefully. I don't want you to be scared of thinking about this in a very business-like manner, even though we're talking about disability. So I hope you can open your minds a little bit, let that disability sort of shadow over you, let that go off to the side for a while, and we'll talk about how you're going to be having a business partnership with entities who serve people with disabilities. Next slide. So my recommended process is to create an application or an RFP, however you feel most comfortable, and then go through an actual process, interview them, have conversations with them, get their references, and then select. So if we're talking about an application, I actually designed for one of my clients a very sort of elaborate application that they had agencies complete. And it asked a lot of questions about what's your experience in this area so far? How many candidates could you find for us in this area, what sorts of things should we be prepared for? Are there other services you can provide? There's a lot of questions that you can ask. Or again, you could prepare an RFP if you want to. Now, if you're in a very rural area, your choices are slim. So you may not want a formal application or RFP, but you still want to go through those next steps to pick between the 2 or 3 that you've got. If you're in an urban area, you probably have 20 as an option. And so how do you narrow that down? How do you find the best ones? If you're lucky enough to be in Massachusetts, there's actually networks of these entities, and you can work through those networks to find the best ones. Missouri, St. Louis area has a coalition like that, a network like that actually helps these entities be serving to you without you having to pick through them all to detail. So I think it's the application and RFP process is a great way to do it. But again, depending on where you are, that may be too much. It might be a little bit over the top. But you do want to interview these agencies. You want to have conversations with the folks who are leading their employment services or vocational services programs. And you want to understand from them, what's their perspective? What's their why? Why are they doing this? Why do they provide those services? How do those organizations work? Are they funded through the government? Do they get funding from other ways? How do they match the people that they provide services to with the individuals with the job opportunities that you've got to offer to people? How will they do that matching? How many staff do they have? That's always a question. Do they have job coaches? How do they provide these services? What sorts of things are they going to be doing on your location? Those interviews will really help you understand how they work, what they do, those sorts of things. And then you want to have a conversation. It becomes not just asking them questions, but actually having a conversation. I think that the bottom line from my perspective for partnerships is making sure everybody has a shared goal. So if you can come up to defining what's a win-win for your organization and for their organization, and have that through a conversation, that will lead you to what you need for success. Also, those conversations can talk about, how are we going to communicate with each other? How often am I going to be hearing from you? And how often do you want to hear from me? And what are we going to do if you can have a whole bunch of what if conversations about potential scenarios, have conversations with them about what does their training look like, things like that. But in the end, I think it's important to get references. And when you're doing that reference process, there's a little bit of a nuance to this particular kind of partnership. And again, it goes back to that previous slide. People are intimidated by disability. They don't want to say critical things about agencies that serve people with disabilities, or they don't want to say critical things about employees with disabilities, which we will tackle in a different webinar coming up about management. But references, everybody's going to say, oh, that agency is wonderful. Nobody wants to say a bad thing about an agency that serves people with disabilities. So you got to kind of pick in there and say, well, how many openings did you have? How many people did they provide you to fill those openings? And how long did those people stay? Were they able to do the jobs that you wanted them to, or was there a different scenario? Were supports put in place? Was there a job coach needed or special training assistance that was provided? So the references you need to dig in a little bit for those references and really be able to find out what they mean if they say, yeah, this agency is great. Because you want to dig into how were they in fitting your employment needs. Another caution on that is that most companies will say, oh, we got this one guy or this one gal from them and they're so great, blah, 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 because they've fallen in love with that person. I don't mean that in a weird way, but they've really become enamored with that candidate, and that candidate is probably providing them a lot of assistance with their engagement issues with their workforce, getting a lot of loyalty from the customer base as well as from the workforce. So I think it's important to dig into those references a little bit and just ask a bunch of questions. Again, this is something that people should be honest with. You want them to be honest with you, and you want them to be helping you make a good decision about who to create a partnership with. Next slide. The other thing that I think is really important in this selection process is to discuss the metrics. What's important to you, metrics-wise? Next slide. Or is it not? Maybe it's just slow. But we're looking for, there we go, the costs. So is this about time, your effort? Is it about how long it will take for them to come up with a candidate? Is there a financial arrangement? That's what I keep seeing now as a trend, is that we've got staffing agencies that focus on people with disabilities. There's a couple of them now. They won't necessarily sit down with you on the local level and make sure that your needs are being met, but they're really trying to include people with disabilities in their workforce. Do you have a shared vision? Again, to me, that is one of the most important metrics, is making sure that everybody's on the same page in what we're trying to accomplish. And at the end of the day, you are a business, and you need to be able to do whatever your business does, whether it's providing services, whether it's getting a truck out, whether it's creating something or answering a phone, whatever your business does, you want to have people connected with that shared vision. You really want to be thinking about, how do we work together and create a win-win? Click. Because you want to be able to make sure that you both have the same benefits in mind. How is this all going to work? Say that you are going to be paying for these services. Are there tax incentives that you can use to offset that? What sorts of financial benefits can you expect from these workers? Do they have lower turnover, like we talked about in the first webinar of the series? What are those benefits? Do we expect them from this particular workforce that that are being sourced by these agencies? So will they have lower turnover? Are these folks who are really loyal to their jobs? Are they capable of doing the job itself and meeting the standards as you have them set? Are they going to be safe or safer than everybody else? Those are sorts of the benefits that we're looking at, as well as tax incentives and things like that. And whoever you're going to be partnering with should be able to talk to you about what those benefits are. And you can actually calculate them out. You can do a whole ROI, cost benefit analysis sorts of things. Next slide. And be able to talk about the tangible and the intangible. So let's talk about that selection. I want you to think about this like you think about vendor selection. When you're hiring a janitorial crew, what do you do when you're selecting who's going to be providing those services for you? When you're looking for landscaping, when you're looking for any of the services that you use, maybe you have IT support that you contract out, anything that you outsource, what sorts of decision points do you have through that process to decide who you're going to pick? And then mirror that as much as you can. It's not exactly the same unless you are going to be in a financial relationship with them. Then it is exactly the same, and you make sure you get your ROI. But you want quality. Maybe you want to know about their licensing or their bonding or their insurance coverage for folks who are on their payroll. Maybe they're going to have coaches coming in. Those are the sorts of questions you want to ask about. And again, experience and references. We do that for our vendor selection. You want to do that for this sort of thing. And even with our vendor selection, we do make sure we have an aligned vision on what is good going to look like. What are we all trying to accomplish? What's the quality standard, or what's their metric and what's your metric? So again, this is very similar to vendor selection in very slightly nuanced way. It's not, but I think that's the best metaphor I've got for this process. And most of the companies that I've worked with who have gone through this kind of a process, when they're done, they've all said, oh, well, that's just like vendor selection. I'm like, yes, it is. We want to mirror that as much as possible, just knowing that sometimes you're going to be talking to nonprofits, which gives you a little bit difference of like a financial standpoint and those sorts of things. Next slide. So I have just rattled off a whole bunch of selection criteria. I'm kind of curious, what is most important to you? If you are looking at partnering with an entity that's going to source candidates for you, what's the most important selection criteria that I've mentioned? And I'd love it if you could just type it into the chat, or you can raise your hand and Becca can turn on your microphone. And then what did I forget? Maybe in this whole section you were waiting to hear something specific, and I would love to hear that from you as well. And I will pause to see if we get anything in the chat. And I'll interrupt for a second just to say, Becca, thank you for managing all of this today. In my tech difficulties, I do appreciate the support. In case some of you have come in a little bit late, I have to do this from my phone because the internet is down at my house, and Becca is managing the slides for me.
No problem. Thank you, Deb. I think people have some questions. Is if you could classify what you think might be the most important thing, if you how to answer that question yourself. As you said, there's a lot of factors and things to look at. So people are curious as to what you think.
I think that previous success is a huge indicator, and I really encourage my clients to look at where has this entity served others and how have they served others. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people that are smaller agencies, and they try to do it all themselves, and they just haven't been able to really deliver. And that's, to me, the most important thing, is if an entity is going to under promise and over deliver, that's who you want to work with. So I, up until about 2 years ago, I was pretty opposed to paying for folks with disabilities to be in your workforce. And since then, I've seen some folks who charge and their quality is amazing. And they just continue to deliver. So I think it's just about reputation and the ability to meet your needs. So to me, that's it. It's all about that, the end point. It's not about charity. It's not about, messing around with the governmental stuff. And tax incentives are nice, but everybody can offer tax incentives. That's not really a differentiator. But to really think about, am I getting somebody who's going to want to come to work every day, who's going to do the jobs I have as I have them designed, not trying to carve out something new? Those are the most important criteria to me. And when I'm looking for partnerships with others, like you guys who are helping me with this webinar, one of the things we really talked about was aligning our goals and our visions and making sure that we could meet each other's needs. So I think that's the most important selection criteria. Any other questions or chats from folks?
Great. We're just seeing an echo and a sense of trust and timeliness and all of those things. So very much in agreement.
All right. Then we'll move on to the last section. Managing these partners. I can tell you, next slide, this is the key to everything. At Walgreens, this was, I think, the most challenging part for us. And I always go back to Walgreens because that was my first experience of doing this. And we didn't have any qualms about saying to an agency that served people with disabilities, you know what, you're not cutting the mustard, you got to go. And I think we kind of set the tone for a lot of other companies to realize that quality is so important. And that, again, walks into managing these partnerships. So I think there's 6 keys to managing partnerships successfully. This actually could probably apply to also like your spouses and your partnerships with your kids and your friends and your churches and your communities and everything. But we'll talk about these and really how they fit into employment and partnerships for employing people with disabilities in your workforce. So next slide. To me, transparency is the most important thing. I don't want a partner who's going to be holding back information. I don't want a partner that isn't going to be able to explain to me, I can't do that. This is why I can't do that. A lot of entities that provide services to people with disabilities, they have a lot of regulation that they operate within. And as businesses, we know what regulations like. It's the reality that you exist within. So when people can be honest about what they can and cannot do and provide that, sometimes you need that transparency of, well, why can't you do this? Oh, because of this? Well, how can I help you fix that? I mean, that's just, it really makes it a much more collaborative engagement. So I think that transparency is very important. To me, it's almost the make or break of a relationship. If somebody's going to be hiding information from you or not completely forthcoming with things, that's where, to me, that trust breaks down immediately. Next slide. I think clear communication is essential in any relationship you're having, any partnership you've got. Clear communication is the key. Being able to say, I want this, and then saying, I can provide that, and are this and that the same thing? In fact, I was just in a meeting this morning. We were actually talking about tax incentives for employment for people with disabilities. And we were talking about, to the business, do you collect tax incentives? And they said, oh, sure. Well, we weren't clear enough about asking which specific tax incentives we were talking about. And then we found out, oh, we're speaking different languages. We're not on the same page. That clear communication, always striving for that and working together to make sure that you are speaking the same language. When you're using terminology, that you define it. If you're going to use any acronyms, make sure you're clear on that. And the other part of that, to me, is to plan your communication. Do you have a set interval for connecting with each other, for checking in, for verifying things? That's, I think, another piece of it that some people forget. They just say, well, we'll communicate with you when we need to. I highly recommend that you have a very set communication schedule. And if you need to adapt it later on, it's too frequent, then you do that. But I think you always err on the side of having too much communication in the beginning, and then you can back off a little bit. It's so hard to, again, go back to building that trust if you haven't communicated clearly. Next slide. I think being aware of try that again. I think being aware of strengths and weaknesses is huge. Nobody can do everything. Nobody can do everything, except maybe in a movie. But in real life, we all need each other. And being aware of where the strengths and weaknesses are, that's how you find your yin and your yang. That's how you find that perfect partnership. Somebody who knows everything about how to facilitate a webinar, like the one we're on right now, and somebody else who's more of a subject matter expert on this particular topic. We work together really well. I know what my strengths are. I know what my weaknesses are, vice versa. That's where partnerships really work together. And especially for agencies that serve people with disabilities, partnering with a business about their employment needs, be aware of what that agency's shortcomings are. It may be that they can't meet your needs immediately every time. And then they're going to want the reassurance that the partnership is still there. If they're going to be honest and say, I don't have anybody for that, but I do want to continue this partnership. The next time you've got an opening, I want the people I provide services to in the workforce I'm working with to have opportunities to that. That honesty is so important. And so when agencies are saying, well, we can do everything, we can do everything, we can serve all your needs, that's where I start to really question people. So I think it's a good sign of a partnership to be able to just acknowledge the strengths and weaknesses, because then you can work together to get through them. Next slide. Define a process. Okay, so anybody who has ever worked with me in my entire career knows I love process more than anything. If you can sketch it all out from beginning to end, I am a happy camper. Way back when, and this will tell you how old I am and how long I've been working, they used to call me the binder queen, because I would put things together, put them in a binder, get those dividers in there, all organized with a table of contents on the front. If any of you are like that, it makes you feel so good that you know where the information is. You don't have to wait for things to be on the fly. So defining a process, I think, is important. And again, I had a meeting this morning that was pretty revealing to leading to this webinar this afternoon. And we were talking about what's the process when the candidate comes in the door. Then what happens? Who's going to make sure the application gets completed, and who's going to follow it inside the applicant tracking system? Who's going to worry about the interviews and setting them up? Who's going to coach the managers who are doing the interviews, etc.? Have that defined. Write it down. You can always modify it. You can always edit. But if you don't start out by defining it, that's where I find all of the miscommunication happening, is when we don't define the process. So since you're talking about staffing people, you're talking about sourcing candidates with disabilities, let's put it on paper. How are we going to do this? How are we going to track it? That's important. I think the process is key. If some of you are much more casual people, hey, I can get casual, but when it comes to this sort of stuff, process will help you every single time. You don't have to be so ironclad on it. Everything can be modified. Everything can be massaged to make it work better. But if you don't start with a process, you're going to be lost from my perspective. Next slide. Okay, this is my other thing that I get all about, accountability and metrics. How are you going to define success in this partnership? Because if you say success is my workforce all my workforce needs being filled, and their success is people getting jobs, that's great. But let's look at what's in the middle. You want people to do the jobs you have. They want to say that they're going to be defined by the metric of whether they're bringing you people who can do your jobs. You don't just need people. You need people who can do the jobs. So again, those metrics are important, and then holding people accountable for them. I get a lot of pushback when I say, can you get us 10 candidates? And people say, I don't. Okay, well, can you or can you not? That's part of this whole transparency thing as well. What can you do? What can you not do? I need 20 bodies in this job. I'd love to have people with disabilities be on all of them, but I need them filled by next March. Can you meet that? And then have that conversation. I think where partnerships fall down is when people don't stick to the metrics. They don't agree with what's the metric going to be. Again, going back to the shared vision. What are the accountability measures, and who's accountable for what? Being able to define that. Again, I go back to defining process, but that's where my brain lives all the time. Those are keys to partnerships. I think that's that's where you see things falling down. And whether we're talking about a business partnership or a personal partnership, without accountability, that's where you hear about divorce. That's where you hear about, the band breaking up. It's usually around accountability. Next slide. And here's my final key to partnership. Be prepared to walk away. Be prepared to shop elsewhere. If you found your dream home and it is your dream home, you're going to stay there. But if it turns out that it's not the dream home, or if your dreams change, you're going to go look for another house. Same thing. I think that if you're managing a partnership and you're not willing to walk away, then you're going to be frustrated. I think that that's really key. Now, it doesn't mean you aren't going to look for reconciliation and a lot of ways to mend the fences, but you need to be prepared to walk away. You know what you need. And if they can't deliver that, then you need to find somebody who can. And it sounds very harsh, and I am a very blunt and direct person, so I don't feel bad saying this. Be prepared to find somebody new. This is not marriage. This is just a business relationship. And so it's okay to say, if you can't meet my needs, I'm going to have to find somebody else or add somebody on. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. It could be somewhere in the middle. I'll still work with you, but I'm going to have to find somebody who can meet these immediate needs right now, and I'll keep you in the longer term, whatever it's going to be. But just because you get into a relationship with an entity about sourcing people with disabilities, unless you have a contract with them and you got a financial relationship, you can walk away at any point in time. And even if you have a contract, there should be out clauses. So I think it's important to remember you're not stuck. And that's what I hear from a lot of businesses when they come to me and they're 4 years into a partnership with a service agency, usually a disability service agency that really hasn't met their needs. They say, well, we're stuck. We're working with this group. They got us 3 good candidates in the beginning, and in the last 2 years, they've gotten nothing, or they've given us people who we've had to let go. We don't know what to do. Well, you got to have that conversation and then say, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to add somebody else in or just move on to the next one. And I think, again, we go back to that whole disability fear thing. I think companies feel bad about that because of the disability factor, because our society makes us all think that somehow we have to be charitable to people with disabilities all the time, even in business. And charity is great. But when we're talking about a workforce and our workforce needs, that's where we really need to think about the business and really stick to the business case. And from my perspective, that means you need to be willing to walk away if things are not going well and you've worked hard to make them work well and they're still not working. You got to move on. Okay, so that's the end of my Yep. And I have a typo I can see. So please forgive me for the typo. But type into the chat. What do you think is most important in business partnerships? We can get onto a conversation about personal partnerships all day long. So let's try to focus right now on business partnerships, especially about sourcing candidates with disabilities into key roles. What do you think is important? I already talked about what I think is important, so I'd love to hear from everybody else. We have 10 minutes left in this webinar. I apologize because I do have something to go to at the top of the hour, so I can't stay much longer after this, but tell me what you think, and then we'll be going to Q&A.
We got some knowing what you need.
Yes.
No, not just sort of shooting in the dark for it, so that's good.
Yep.
Trust.
I agree. Trust. Yep.
Yeah. Thoughtful preparation.
Nice. That's true. Sometimes I can be not great at that.
We got, so I'm getting several in private chat, but we just got one in public chat. Thank you, Grace. Match the needs of the company. That's a good one.
Yes. To me, that's the bottom line. You got to work up from there, but that is totally the bottom line, meeting the needs of the company.
We also got our retention services offered.
Yeah. So not just placement, but will the people stay there? And I think that's important in the metrics. When we're talking about metrics, it's not just hiring. It's making sure that the workforce is going to stay. Maybe they're going to move up. That's okay. But from a business perspective, we want these folks to stay. Any others? Those were good.
Yeah, I think that's what we've got. Nothing else in the private. So.
Okay. All right. So thank you. We are 66% through. I did the math. We have 1/3 left of the year left. We have done a lot of work on strategy and some of the very specific nuances of disability employment, disability inclusion. And then we've just covered sourcing. It took us 2 webinars, but we've now really tackled sourcing. So the rest of this year, we'll be focusing on managing people with disabilities, including performance management specifically. That seems to be a very touchy topic. So we're hitting that in October. And then I want to round out the year with growing a disability culture. So if you've already got this going and you want to be able to grow it more, how do we do that? And then the final one is refreshing your effort. Because I find that companies get about 5 years into this and their enthusiasm, maybe the leadership has changed and things sort of stagnate for a while. So how do you get it back up again? That'll be the way to say, woohoo, we finished this year. But I think Becca's putting into the chat the link for the webinar. It's all the same webpage, but you do need to register for each one individually. And so that's important from my perspective, just so I make sure people don't miss it. Oh, sorry. And so, oops, somebody's coming in.
There it is.
And thank you, Becca, for putting that in there. Next slide. So this is the time for questions. We've got 8 minutes left. I do apologize. I'm going to cut you all off exactly then, even if I'm still talking to you. Maybe you can talk to each other. But what are the questions specific to this webinar or in general around sourcing candidates with disabilities and creating partnerships for sourcing candidates with disabilities? Because I think that is where really people are challenged in a more global sense, really thinking it through. How do we do this? Or why would I do that? Or what am I missing? So what are the questions you guys have related to sourcing candidates with disabilities through partnerships? I'm not frozen, I'm just holding still. No questions, no thoughts? I could let you guys go early.
I'm checking private chats as well.
Okay. I forgot you have to juggle so much with managing this for me.
I think we just have one question around the idea of, are there good reference checking questions to ask? You had mentioned, people will always give you never put a bad reference out there, but are there sort of telltale questions that you should think to ask?
I would probe into asking them to tell you specifically a time when they had a very specific need and the agency was able to meet that need. So getting specific about the kinds of skills they were looking for and how that person met that skill need, whether there was anything else around that individual. They don't have to disclose who the person was or what their disability was or anything like that, but really dig in and ask for stories, ask for that information, because you can tell if they're going to kind of skip over things or make things over glossy and really nice sounding. So I dig into references. There are a lot of hiring decisions I make where I just sort of check a reference and go because, I'm going to be working with that person. But I think when you're creating a partnership, you really want to understand where has their success come from. And I think that that's unfortunate for agencies that are just breaking into this industry because the references are so important. And if you're just starting, it's hard to have that traction. It's hard to be able to give those references. And so it allows us to really hone in on success begets success. So we're always going to be looking for those who we know are surefire things. Maybe you want to, on the side, take a more risky one. But if you've got workforce needs, if you've got bodies that you need to get into your workforce, you want to know who's the best and who's going to be able to meet your needs. And I think you get that from other businesses. And I'll just tell a quick story. So I know I do some work with James Emmett and Company right now. And they've just got a company that loves them. They've now got 350 employees through JEC. And so that's the reference. And people come to them and ask them about those jobs and about those, and then they decide to go with that organization. So you can't miss by really seeking that detailed information about success, not just how many did you get, but tell me about the workforce needs. And everybody's going to tell you how great that employee was. How were they great? What does that mean when you say that they were great, that you enjoyed them working in your business? I think that that's important. Also, to get them to say, what was the worst thing that happened? Tell me about one that didn't work out and how did they resolve that? I think that those are always great stories. Tell me about a mix-up. Tell me about a mess-up. And how did they recover? How did they apologize? How did they correct that? Or at least admit that they needed to correct it. Those are things that I think will really tell you about the quality of an organization and whether they've worked to meet every business's needs. So references are important in digging into them. That's a good question. Thank you.
I think we've got about 3 minutes, and I have one more quick question is, if you're working with a partner who's new to doing this, a local partner who's new, are there resources or other businesses, partner organizations that might act as a mentor for them or help them that you know of? Or is that...
That is a great question. Most of what I see is serious, fierce competition. So that's a good question, and I think I'm stumped. I really can't think of, you can go to things like APSE, which is the Association for People for Supported Employment. I don't remember exactly what they stand for, APSE. And they have a certification for Certified Employment Support Professionals. And looking for that certification can really kind of assist people in getting their skill sets up to be able to meet businesses' needs. So maybe that's where to go through APSE. APSE has local chapters as well as their national. But that certification, the courses that are available through that certification really could help you up your game and really prepare yourself to be able to meet an employer's needs. Or if you're a business and you really like this local organization, but they really haven't been able to meet your needs, maybe you're suggesting to them that this is a way for them to be able to, really improve their offerings to you as a business. That's a good question too. Well, you almost stumped me.
Awesome. Great. That is all I have in my chats.
Excellent. You guys are letting me go. That's good. I'm going to make it to my next meeting. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody attending this and putting up with the tech problems that we've got going here. I want to thank you so much, Becca, for always supporting me through this, and especially this one where I needed a lot more help. I love the partnership with you guys. It's fabulous. And I thank you, everybody, for attending. I'll get the replay out as soon as I can. It'll come to your inbox, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye.